Hello. Hi. Hola. We're using Blender 279, and here's a quick secret. Sometimes you see people with these fantastic renders that are really big, and there's a lot of contrast between the brights and the darks, and they seem to not have all this noise and fireflies in the dark part of their images. How do they do that? And whether you've been using Blender for a while or you're just starting, how can you test without waiting 24 minutes per picture? And you can see this picture right here is 24 minutes, and it has noise that's basically something I don't want to deal with. I've discovered a couple of things, and it has to do with a couple of things. This is very relevant to 2.79. And let's begin by talking about the denoising feature. Is it something that you can use to help denoise images that have a lot of fireflies and aren't clamped very well? I tried, and it looks awfully bizarre, even when it's small or not blown up to 100%. And so I thought that I would take the scene that I have here and experiment with a couple of things. First of all, you can look through your camera view, or you can look through perspective view, and you can activate the render border. With the render border on through your camera view, when you hit Shift Z, you'll be able to do a sample render inside that border of just the camera. That's pretty helpful. Not everyone does it, and there's something even better. Ctrl+B will adjust the size of that render border. So when you hit Shift Z, it will only render inside that little render border. To get rid of your render border is Ctrl+Alt+B, and that through your camera view will activate the entire thing until you click border again under the render tab. But you probably already know that, so let's take a look at some problem areas of this picture. Under the bed, for example, is a pretty big problem, and you can see I can just interrupt the render and Ctrl+B a new area. And I got a lot of mysterious fireflies on this flat wall. This flat wall has no texture, so ideally, like a kid's book drawing, it should be perfectly smooth, gradiating from light to dark. I get lots of noise. One thing that I've learned that you may not know is that when your samples for the preview are set to 0, it shuts them down, as opposed to having a number in that field. Then your number will cap at whatever. I put in 1200, it stopped at 1200. If you put in 0, it will just keep going. And that gives you an idea of perhaps how many samples will you need in the render to minimize the amount of fireflies or the amount of noise that's in the information. And so this is really handy because you can zip around and look at different areas of your scene, and even just in this amount of time, with a small little Ctrl+B render border, I'm already up to over 700 samples, and I can see that certain trouble areas are benefiting from more samples. Now, I had tinkered around with ambient occlusion. I don't want to denoise. I tinkered around with ambient occlusion and lowered the distance to 5 and increased the factor back to 1 from a 0.1 because I was just getting too much information that I couldn't use. And then I remembered that something was going on inside this picture which I hadn't done before. I'm using portals, by the way. If you see this area light, it's actually a portal. Let me see if I can stop this render. Go to wireframe. You see this rectangle, and that tells Blender focus the sun lamp through this window here. And there's another one coming through a doorway. I wonder which one it is. I think it's this one. There's actually a doorway letting light in from my environment, and this portal says focus your rays of light through here. Those aren't completely relevant right now, but what they also do is not only direct sunlight, but your environment light. And so my really new thing for this particular render, I don't like that, right? Come on, Z, Z, then Shift Z. Okay, what was really new for me was trying this dynamic sky. Dynamic sky can be found in user preferences, and it's the only item under lighting. Dynamic sky lighting can be found in the 3D view in the tools. These are the tools over here, and down at the bottom I have Dynamic Sky. It says Create. When you create it, your World tab has the good old-fashioned world that you're used to, and now something called Dynamic, followed by the number of dynamic skies that you've created. I realized that a lot of the noise that I have comes from this dynamic world, which is essentially an HDR environment map going all the way around everything. And I just want to show you one quick look at the insanity of that. I'm going to click on the room, hit Shift F3, and jump right into the node editor. But when you click on the world data to take a look at, and we take a look at what's making the sky, it's actually quite orderly. This is really quite lovely. We can shrink it all together with SX, and that's it'll scale things down so you're not overwhelmed by the horizontal spread. And mouse wheel dragging and mouse wheel rolling in and rolling out lets you take a look at everything that's going on here. Nothing is hidden, nothing is grouped. There don't seem to be any panels or groups to tab into, and so it's all pretty straightforward. And I say that meaning it's not really straightforward, but at least it's stuff you can see. What I realized is that a lot of my biggest problems, I'll Ctrl+B again to do a render border here, a lot of the biggest problems I'm having come from the fact that the amount of noise generated by one of these beautiful dynamic skies is just blowing this picture full of noise. I lifted the value of the sun to 1.5. If I put it to its default 1, I kind of lose that burn in the carpet that I was looking for. So that's why I had it up to 1.5. Using it above 1 introduces an insane amount of artifacts. So I can always go back to the world environment, which is the very boring pretham. But look, even with 400, my wall back here is about as smooth as the wall in an illustration in a kid's book. I've also got to turn something on. I have a sun lamp in here that I think is off right now because I didn't want it competing with the dynamic sky. When the dynamic sky is on, it generates a sun, so it's okay to turn your lamp off. My lamp should be set to 0. It is. So I'm going to set my lamp up to that 1.5 just to see what it's going to end up doing to that smooth wall. I want that sun bright, like bright. So I'm going to go up to 5. Still not as bright as it was at 1.5 for the dynamic sky. I'm going to go up to 9. How can you tell when this is really something that's carrying pixels that are too white? Let's clamp it at 1200. And now instead of just whirling on and on, when it gets to 1200, it will actually halt. And Blender 2.79 does something really generous for us. Filmic is core, which is why I have attached this to the 01 video earlier that says why Filmic. Filmic is now core, and so it's part of the view. What's also part of the view, instead of what was previously part of the look, is something called false color. False color will take a look at your samples that you have rendered, even in a 3D view or camera view, and it will give you a heat map of what information is still usable. I can slide this exposure, and you see that corner of the window is turned red. Red means, man, you are just about out of luck. Once it goes to white, you have clipped. So if there were clouds back here, or a tree, or a mountain, or anything I actually wanted to see through that window, it's gone. Can't see it. Too bright, no information, no room, nothing available. And you could really just go too far, and suddenly the ground on the carpet has gone white. There's just no usable information available in these exposure conditions. So I'm going to tell you to keep an eye out for that, because that false color will help you change the exposure. What leads to a good exposure is knowing how many samples you need and also controlling the quality of light that's coming in and bouncing around. I ended up turning my bounces of light down to 1, but leaving almost everything else at a preset of full global illumination, which you have on just about any version of Blender. I got insane fireflies and rays, photons, that just didn't know what to do with themselves when I had this up to 128. I also set my clamp in direct way up to 5 so that rays that were ready to die died at about the color they're supposed to be. Because when that setting is too low, those rays die and you get like little black spots everywhere. So 5 was right for me. 3, the spots were a little dark. I wonder if it affects previews of materials. Well, would you look at that? Now, that's exciting. You can double check the effect of light and exposure on your materials. That's pretty handy. So if you have a glossy material, you'll be able to see where it's dark or where the value is 0 exposure value, which is gray in this case. I have a white ceiling, so if there was direct light on that ceiling, it would really be coming close to being too much. My room is a yellow, and that's not far from white in terms of values. It will also, of course, show you where you are going wrong with your environment. So let false color be your guide when it comes to how much light you dump into the scene to get a good render where the shadows are not filled with fireflies and mess. This is okay. 1200, a sky texture environment here, Pretham, and the, where did it go? I was looking right at it. The ambient occlusion is 1 with a distance of 10. If I changed it to a distance of 5, it would actually brighten things up a little bit. And I'll let this spin, and then I will ask false color what it thinks of that. That's actually pretty exciting. I'm glad you can look at materials with this. There's another secret inside a quick secret. I'm really thrilled that I discovered there was so much light bouncing around from that dynamic sky. Use the dynamic sky for an outdoor scene. Use a good old-fashioned sky and some hand-drawn clouds or hand-modeled clouds for an interior scene. I had spent a lot of time working with this model, without this wall, which I believe is on layer 3. So if I remove layer 3 and we do that again, you'll see that now light is not a problem because it was missing an entire wall. And I was going to go through this whole thing about how you could really have a wonderful time taking walls away, but then I decided to throw light just through a portal through the door, and I encountered all of those fireflies that you see in this render here, which took 25 minutes. Now I suspect, see how that was not helpful. Now I suspect that if I were to render this, and I have to hit Ctrl+B through the camera to get rid of my render border, if I were to render this as it is, that I would have much better time of it, and it wouldn't take 25 minutes because I don't have that dynamic sky. So there's a good result. It's clean and it's pretty much good for storybook purposes. I mean, let's face it, you want to do something creative with your Blender usage. This is okay for a kid's book, but it's not got the insane color bouncing that this one had. I wonder if I can get some of that carpet to bounce around all over the place. I tried to match the dynamic sky sun with the actual lamp that I was using as a sun. They're not perfectly lined up because the dynamic sky has that weird dot thing like this that I didn't even bother changing on this one. Ooh, maybe I should. Like, that's not cool. What is that? Where's that sun, man? What are you? Alright, 2.2. What is this? I mean, what? Alright, now I've got a chance of finding... God, where the hell is that thing? That's... I kind of see... something happening. Come on, get into the middle, get to the middle, get to the middle. That's middle-ish, right? Good for us. And hit Z and increase our bounces and see if we can gather up some of that rug color. What color was the rug, by the way? I didn't think it was as orange as it seemed to have been. The floor is kind of orange. Okay, so that's why in this view, as opposed to this view, the orange of the rug is just flying all over the place. At least I think that's why. And instead of doing a big render, because that seems to be the color here, it does look like a little fur ball over here in the preview. I'm very proud of myself. That is one stupid rug material. I can test the color change with my quick secret. So here's a render border with no limit and one bounce for bounces. And it just seems to sit there. Now here's the same with 128. Now it seems to gather up color from the adorable yellow-orange fuzzy material that I have on the carpet. So if at 1200 samples this smooths out, I know I'm onto something. If at 1200 samples it doesn't, then I can either sit and wait or maybe try denoising with that default setting of 8 and 0.5. What did I just hit? I hit 0.5. Good, there's 1200. And it's kinda smooth. Still a bit on the noisy side. But I think that is the kind of smooth that denoising would do well with. If I hit the home button, it will show me the entire extent of the camera view, which I happen to be in. And so this is kind of actual size, you know, give or take. So I'm going to wait for those samples to go up, and I think that we're on to something. So my third render should have that nice orange bounce. My problem is I've turned down the effect of the sky. It's all experimentation. We'll see. This seems to be smoothing out okay. My clamping is having some effect on the ceiling there. It kind of stopped gathering information at about 900. So let me do a little bit down here. And watch all those black spots disappear as light just bounces and bounces around. There's some black spots. There's a black spot in here. It's going away already. A firefly appeared. And I'm only at 700 samples. But it has, and now the firefly is beginning to diminish a little bit around 900. 900, I think, will give the denoise just enough information to be dangerous, as they say. Take away that render border with Ctrl+B and see if we can match that lovely color bounce.
Sucks, but like it's always better to elaborate more and to be more clear with what you mean. Because if you say that looks off, then like of course the artist is like, yeah, it looks off to me too.
Well, that's a definite improvement over This, as far as the color spread, it's not as beautiful as this one with the noisy sky information, but I'll tell you what is a final thing that can happen to this. Before you hit F3 to save anything that you think is good and you want to go and deal with, you can give yourself a little bit of a head start. Not only can you double check where the exposure is good and where the exposure is bad, that's really quite nice. Was it -3 and it's +1? You can go ahead and try to use curves, which is not something I'm used to, but let's give it a whirl. I'm going to do a click there and a click here, and I'm going to click down here. And what I'm clicking down here is I know that what I'm doing, I suspect that what I'm doing is locking in. Oh yeah, and you have to let go before you can see it. I suspect what I'm doing is locking in the darks for like the furniture. And I'm going to take this one, and what I want to do is just kind of pull down the walls, and they're getting brighter. Okay. Sure, of course they are, because down is up. Gotcha. Maybe those aren't the walls, huh? That's very amusing. It's like it's all relative. I kind of like it that way. Anyway, so I was that's funny. Pulling it down with the denoise feature, I seem to have lost some of my nice fuzzy carpet, because noise is some of my displacement for this nice fuzzy carpet. And denoising, well, guess what? It's not a big surprise, is it? It's taken away some of that noise. So I don't really want to lose the furniture, but I do want to, oh my gosh, get the wall. Tell you what, let's leave that right where it is. I just wanted to get the richness of the darks on that wall. Yeah. All right, final point. When you are adjusting an image, you're trying to sell some part of that image. You could kind of wash the whole thing out and sell the entire image, and everything is equally exposed, and to me that just looks a lot like 3D. Everything is equally valued and beautifully represented and accounted for, but sometimes you just want to sell an idea. And right now, all I'm trying to sell is the light coming in through that window. Ooh. It's a bit intense, but I might want it to be intense. The light coming through the window is the thing that I really wanted to sell on this. And there's a little bit of a glow on the ceiling and on the wall back here. And then up front, we have these two blocks that are really in the strong sunshine. The noise is basically taken away. A combination of the small sample set that I used with the render border and also a lack of render samples has really helped me find a render that was good enough to use the denoise feature on. And I'm going to leave it at that. This is not supposed to be a final image. It was just me tinkering around. I do hope that you are successful in your Blender efforts. Thanks for watching.